At first glance, it looks normal. Wide streets, large houses, empty space everywhere. But this isn't accidental.
American homes didn't become massive because they had to. They became massive because someone wanted them that way. Tonight, we're asking a question most Americans never stop to ask. Why is so much space considered success? And who decided that bigger meant better?
Before big houses, how Americans used to live small. To understand why American houses became so large, we first need to rewind to a time when they weren't. In the early 1800s, the average American home was modest by today's standards, even for the wealthy. Most families lived in compact, multi-purpose spaces. A single room might function as a kitchen, dining area, workspace, and sleeping quarters. Privacy was minimal, storage was limited, and space itself was considered a luxury, not an expectation. Even as the country expanded westward, early American homes reflected practical survival, not excess. Land was available, but labor was expensive. Contrary to popular belief, big houses didn't immediately appear just because land was abundant. While land was cheaper than in Europe, building materials and skilled labor were costly. Wood had to be milled, bricks had to be fired, glass had to be imported or handcrafted. Every extra room meant additional expense, not only in construction, but in heating, cleaning, and maintenance. So houses stayed small, even on large plots of land. Space was functional, not symbolic. In early America, space was valued for what it could do, not what it could signal. A home was a tool. Shelter from weather, protection from wildlife, a place to eat, sleep, and work. It was not yet a public statement of identity. There was no concept of master bedrooms, dedicated guest rooms, home offices, media rooms, walk-in closets. Those ideas would come much later, when houses stopped being just shelters and started becoming symbols. The first shift, industrialization, changes everything. By the mid-19th century, America began to change rapidly. Industrialization transformed how materials were produced, how homes were built, and how Americans thought about progress. Mass-produced lumber, nails, and glass dramatically reduced construction costs. Railroads allowed materials to travel farther, faster, and cheaper. Suddenly, building a slightly bigger house no longer required extraordinary wealth. But size still wasn't the main goal. Not yet. At this stage, American homes became more compartmentalized, not necessarily larger. Rooms gained specific purposes: separate kitchens, formal parlors, private bedrooms. This wasn't about luxury, it was about order, morality, and social structure. The house began to mirror social hierarchy. Space as morality. Victorian America believed architecture could shape behavior. Separate rooms meant children could be supervised, women could manage domestic labor efficiently, men could host formal guests. Space became a tool for discipline and respectability. But even then, houses were still relatively small by modern standards. The real explosion in size wouldn't happen until something else changed: the American relationship with land, mobility, and the future. And that transformation would arrive in the 20th century.
The automobile changed the size of the American home. The moment American houses started growing faster than American families was the moment distance stopped being a problem. That moment arrived with the automobile. Before cars, where you lived was tightly connected to where you worked, shopped, and socialized. Homes were built close together, not because people liked density, but because walking and streetcars demanded it. Once cars entered daily life, that logic collapsed. Mobility created psychological space. The automobile did more than move people. It changed how Americans felt about space. Distance no longer meant inconvenience, it meant freedom. A longer commute became acceptable, even desirable, if it promised a quieter environment, more land, and a private home. Suddenly, living far from the city center wasn't a compromise, it was an upgrade. And when land was no longer scarce, there was no reason to build small. The birth of the suburb as a system. Early suburbs existed before cars, but they were limited to rail lines and streetcar routes. The automobile turned suburbs into a scalable system. Developers could now build, farther from city centers, on cheaper land, at much larger scales. This allowed for a new housing formula: detached single-family homes, front yards, backyards, driveways, and garages. Each element required space. Each layer pushed houses outward and eventually upward. Zoning laws made size mandatory. As suburbs expanded, local governments introduced zoning regulations. These rules were not neutral. They dictated minimum lot sizes, minimum setbacks from the street, maximum density, single-use residential zones. In many areas, small houses became illegal to build. Not undesirable, not unprofitable, illegal. A house couldn't simply be modest. It had to meet minimum square footage requirements. This quietly locked in size as a baseline. Once zoning codes established a normal house size, anything smaller felt temporary or inferior. The garage, America's largest room. One of the most overlooked contributors to house size is the garage. In many American homes, the garage is wider than the living room, takes up the most visible street frontage, dictates the entire floor plan. The garage is not an accessory, it is a structural priority. As car ownership became universal, garages expanded, from one car to two, from storage to workshop, from side structure to front-facing centerpiece. And when the garage grows, the house must grow around it. The driveway effect. Once a home includes a driveway, a front yard, a garage, the house is pushed farther back from the street. That setback creates a visual emptiness. To fill it, houses grow wider. To justify that width, interiors expand. The result is not intentional excess, it is design inflation. Each element demands the next. Suburban economics reward bigger homes. Developers quickly learned a key rule. The cost difference between a medium house and a large house is smaller than most buyers think. Land is already purchased, infrastructure is already installed. Adding extra square footage increases sale price, property tax value, perceived status, but adds relatively little to construction cost. So developers build bigger because the market rewards it. Over time, this resets expectations. What once felt large becomes normal. What once felt normal becomes small. Space as distance from others. Suburbs weren't just about space. They were about separation. Distance from noise, crowds, industry, other social classes. Large houses reinforced that separation. More rooms meant more privacy, more control, more internal hierarchy. Size became a buffer between the household and the outside world. Bigger homes, smaller communities. As houses grew, something else shrank. Daily interaction. Large private interiors reduced clients on shared public space. Why go outside when everything you need fits inside your own walls? This shift would have profound consequences, not just for architecture, but for American social life. And it set the stage for the next transformation. Because once big houses existed, they needed a meaning, and that meaning would be defined by post-war America.
When house size became a measure of success. After World War II, the United States entered a period unlike anything it had experienced before. Factories that once produced weapons shifted to consumer goods. Millions of soldiers returned home. The economy expanded rapidly, and for the first time, large segments of the population could afford things that had once been reserved for the wealthy. But more than money changed, the meaning of success changed, and the house became its most visible expression. The post-war promise. For returning veterans, home ownership wasn't just a personal goal, it was a national promise. Government-backed loans through the GI Bill made it possible to buy a home with low down payments, long repayment periods, favorable interest rates. This dramatically increased demand for single-family houses. But these homes weren't marketed as minimal or efficient. They were marketed as rewards. A larger house symbolized stability after chaos, achievement after sacrifice, a future built on permanence. Size mattered, not because families suddenly needed more space, but because space represented arrival. The rise of the ideal nuclear home. Post-war culture strongly emphasized the nuclear family, a working father, a homemaking mother, multiple children. This social model required spatial separation. Children needed bedrooms, parents needed privacy, guests needed formal areas. The house became a physical diagram of family roles. Rooms weren't added for necessity alone, they were added to reinforce identity. Advertising redefined normal. Developers didn't just sell houses, they sold lifestyles. Advertisements featured spacious living rooms, large kitchens, multiple bathrooms, lawns wide enough for play and display. The message was subtle but consistent. A good life requires space. A successful family lives large. Over time, this messaging reshaped expectations. What was once aspirational became baseline. A house wasn't considered complete unless it had more rooms than immediately needed. Privacy as a luxury standard. Earlier American homes emphasized shared space. Post-war homes emphasized separation. Parents wanted quiet. Children wanted autonomy. Teenagers wanted their own rooms. The solution wasn't scheduling or compromise, it was square footage. More space became the default answer to social tension. Instead of adapting behavior, Americans adapted architecture. The bathroom explosion. One of the clearest indicators of house inflation is the bathroom count. In early American homes, one bathroom was normal, sometimes none. Post-war homes normalized, one bathroom per floor, eventually one per bedroom. Bathrooms are expensive. They require plumbing, ventilation, and maintenance. Yet they multiplied rapidly because convenience became a marker of modern life. More bathrooms meant less waiting, more privacy, more perceived luxury, and once normalized, they became non-negotiable. The psychological effect of ownership. Post-war prosperity encouraged long-term thinking. Homes were no longer temporary shelters. They were investments. Bigger homes were seen as better financial assets, stronger symbols of upward mobility. Even if families didn't need the space immediately, they were encouraged to grow into it. Empty rooms weren't waste, they were potential. Television changed spatial expectations. Television didn't just change entertainment, it changed architecture. Families began organizing rooms around viewing distance, seating arrangements, acoustic separation. Living rooms grew. Later, as TVs multiplied, so did family rooms, dens, and media spaces. Each new function demanded its own room. The house expanded to accommodate technology, even when technology became smaller. From shelter to statement. By the end of the 20th century, the American house had fully transformed. It was no longer just a place to live. It was a statement of achievement, a reflection of values, a visible ranking within society. Size became legible. Bigger houses communicated success without explanation. And once size carried meaning, shrinking became difficult. Because smaller no longer meant modest, it meant falling behind. The cultural lock-in. By this point, American houses were large not because of necessity, not because of climate, and not even because of wealth alone. They were large because policy encouraged it, markets rewarded it, culture validated it, and reversing that trajectory would require more than new designs. It would require redefining success itself. That tension between tradition and reality would soon collide with economics.
How finance and real estate quietly made houses bigger. By the time American houses became culturally associated with success, another system locked that association into place: finance. Most people don't design their homes, they finance them. And modern American housing is shaped less by architecture than by lending formulas, appraisals, and risk models. Homes are built for banks, not families. In theory, a house exists to serve the people who live in it. In practice, it must first satisfy the lender. Banks don't ask, how efficiently is this space used? How meaningful is this layout? They ask, what is the resale value? How predictable is this asset? Larger homes perform better in these calculations. They are easier to appraise. They fit established market comparables. They carry lower perceived risk. Small, unconventional homes do not. Appraisals reward size, not quality. Appraisers rely on comparable properties. Square footage is one of the strongest variables. Two houses with similar locations and materials can differ significantly in appraised value, purely on size. Design quality is harder to quantify. Craftsmanship is subjective. Spatial intelligence is invisible to spreadsheets. Size is measurable, so size wins. The minimum size trap. Once a neighborhood establishes a typical house size, anything smaller becomes a financial liability. Lenders hesitate, appraisers discount, buyers fear poor resale value. This creates a feedback loop. Developers build to the median or above. Buyers internalize that standard. Future appraisals reinforce it. Over time, the minimum viable house size increases. Not because people demand it, but because the system penalizes anything smaller. Mortgage math favors bigger homes. The structure of American mortgages quietly encourages upsizing. Monthly payments often scale more gently than people expect. For many buyers, a significantly larger house costs only slightly more per month. That marginal difference feels manageable, especially when framed as more space for the future, better resale potential, a smarter long-term investment. The decision feels rational, but multiplied across millions of buyers, it inflates the entire housing market. Property taxes reinforce the pattern. Local governments rely heavily on property taxes. Larger homes generate higher assessed values, higher tax revenue per household. This creates an incentive to favor low density, high value, large home development. Smaller homes produce less revenue while requiring similar infrastructure. From a municipal perspective, big houses are more efficient taxpayers. Why builders avoid small homes? Builders are not ideologists. They respond to incentives. Smaller homes face stricter financing scrutiny,
offer lower profit margins, attract more regulatory friction. Larger homes appraise more easily, sell for higher absolute prices, absorb cost overruns better. So builders design upward, even when they recognize the inefficiency. Custom design is economically discouraged. A highly efficient, well-designed small house often costs more per square foot than a large conventional one. That makes it harder to justify financially. Buyers are taught to compare price per square foot, a metric that favors size over intelligence. This discourages innovation. Uniform largeness becomes safer than thoughtful compactness. Houses as financial containers. At this stage, American houses function less like dwellings and more like containers of capital. They store equity, credit access, intergenerational wealth. In that context, size becomes a form of insurance. Bigger houses protect value better in a system built on growth assumptions. The cost of financial comfort. This financial logic produces houses that are larger than daily life requires. Extra rooms remain unused, maintenance costs rise, energy consumption increases. But the system tolerates inefficiency because it stabilizes asset value. Comfort is measured not by how a house feels to live in, but by how well it performs on paper. Locked into expansion. By now, American housing size is no longer driven by family size, cultural tradition, practical necessity. It is driven by risk management. And once finance sets the rules, architecture follows. The next question becomes unavoidable. What does all this space actually do to people? That's where the consequences begin to surface.
Living in big houses does to daily American life. Large houses promise comfort, but comfort is not the same as connection. As American homes expanded, they quietly reshaped how people move, interact, and relate to one another inside their own walls. Not through intention, but through layout. Distance inside the home. In a small house, proximity is unavoidable. You hear footsteps, you sense presence, you negotiate shared space. In a large house, distance becomes internalized. Bedrooms are separated by corridors. Activities are isolated by rooms. Floors divide generations. Family members can spend entire evenings under one roof without crossing paths. This is not inherently negative, but it is structurally different. More rooms, less shared time. As houses grew, so did specialization. Instead of one living area, there are living rooms, family rooms, media rooms, home offices. Each room reduces friction. And friction, while uncomfortable, often produces interaction. Big houses minimize friction, and with it, spontaneous connection. The quiet decline of the central space. Historically, homes revolved around a core, a hearth, a table, a shared room. Modern American houses often lack a true center. Open floor plans appear communal, but their scale discourages intimacy. Sound disperses, movement spreads, attention fragments. The house becomes a collection of zones rather than a shared organism. Privacy as default. Privacy used to be earned, now it is built in. Children retreat earlier, teenagers disappear longer, adults work from isolated rooms. This reinforces independence, but reduces shared rhythms. Meals become optional, schedules diverge, presence becomes less visible. The house accommodates separation effortlessly. Maintenance as hidden labor. Large houses require constant upkeep. Cleaning takes longer, repairs multiply, energy systems expand. This labor is often invisible, but cumulative. Time spent maintaining space is time not spent inhabiting it meaningfully. The house becomes a project rather than a refuge. Furnishing the void. Big spaces demand to be filled. Furniture scales up, decor multiplies, consumption increases. Rooms that serve no clear function are still expected to look complete. This creates ongoing pressure to buy, arrange, and replace. Space creates demand. Emotional distance and physical scale. Studies consistently show that physical distance influences emotional perception. When people are farther apart, interaction becomes more deliberate. Large houses reduce accidental encounters. Conversations require planning, presence must be scheduled. Over time, this changes how relationships feel. Not colder, but quieter. The illusion of control. Large houses offer control. You can close doors, you can retreat, you can avoid. This can be comforting, but it can also reduce tolerance for shared inconvenience. Smaller spaces teach negotiation. Larger spaces allow avoidance. Children and spatial independence. In large homes, children gain autonomy earlier. This can be empowering, but it also changes family supervision patterns.
Parents rely more on trust and less on proximity. The house supports independence, sometimes before emotional readiness catches up. The paradox of space. More space does not automatically produce better living. It produces different living, and that difference carries subtle costs. Not in dramatic conflict, but in gradual disengagement. The American house became large to offer freedom, but freedom from proximity also means freedom from each other. From interior to exterior consequences. These interior patterns don't stay inside. They extend outward into neighborhoods, streets, and cities. Because when homes are self-sufficient, public space becomes optional. That's where the broader urban impact begins.
How big houses reshaped American neighborhoods and cities. Large houses do not exist in isolation. They dictate the shape of streets. They influence how people move. And they redefine what public space means. When private space expands, public space almost always contracts. The spatial trade-off. Land is finite. When houses grow larger, something else must shrink. In American suburbs, that trade-off usually affects sidewalks, parks, local shops, public gathering spaces. Wide lots and deep setbacks leave little room for shared infrastructure. The result is a landscape optimized for privacy, not interaction. Streets designed for movement, not presence. As houses grew and spread apart, streets changed function. They became conduits. Their purpose shifted from social space to vehicle movement. Front porches lost relevance. Sidewalks became optional. Street life faded. Neighborhoods grew quieter, but also less alive. The disappearance of the corner store. Large houses typically sit in zones separated from commerce. Zoning codes enforce this division. As a result, daily errands require driving. Casual encounters decline. Local economies fragment. The house absorbs functions that once belonged to the neighborhood. Refrigerators grow larger. Storage replaces proximity. Bigger houses, longer distances. Low-density development stretches infrastructure. Schools are farther. Workplaces are farther. Social visits require planning. Distance becomes normal. And with distance comes dependency. On cars. On fuel. On time buffers. The house may feel generous, but the surrounding environment becomes demanding. Social sorting through space. Large lot housing subtly sorts residents. Price, size, and zoning combine to filter who can live where. This produces neighborhoods that are more uniform, economically and culturally. Diversity declines not by intent, but by spatial design. Large houses require large commitments. Public space as optional. When private space satisfies most needs, public space becomes secondary. Why visit a park when you have a yard? Why go to a cafe when you have a media room? Why walk when driving is easier? Public life diminishes not through rejection, but through redundancy. Infrastructure under strain. Sprawling neighborhoods with large houses cost more to service, require more road maintenance, demand extended utilities. But they generate fewer interactions per mile. Cities become financially stretched. Maintenance spreads thin. The house remains comfortable, while the city quietly absorbs the cost. Environmental consequences. Large houses consume more energy, materials, water. They produce more emissions and require more land conversion. This isn't about individual blame. It's about cumulative effect. When millions of houses scale up simultaneously, the impact becomes structural. The psychological scale of the city. Cities are experienced at human scale. Large houses disrupt that scale. Long setbacks reduce visual connection. Wide roads discourage walking. Empty sidewalks signal absence. The environment feels larger, but also lonelier. The feedback loop of sprawl. Once neighborhoods are built around large houses, alternatives become harder. Public transit becomes inefficient. Walkability declines. Density feels foreign. Big houses don't just occupy space. They define what space is allowed to be. The question of sustainability. By this point, the size of American houses is no longer a private choice. It's a public condition. One that shapes cities, budgets, social life, environmental outcomes. And the question shifts from, why are houses so big, to, can this model continue? That question becomes unavoidable as economic and demographic realities change.
When big houses stop matching American life. For decades, American houses kept growing, but American families did not.
This mismatch is one of the most important and least discussed tensions in modern housing. Shrinking households, expanding space. The average American household is smaller than it was in the mid-20th century. Fewer children, later marriages, more single-person households. Yet houses continue to expand. The result? More bedrooms than occupants, more bathrooms than necessary, entire rooms used only occasionally. Space outpaced life. The rise of the empty room. In many American homes, guest rooms remain unused. Formal dining rooms are visited a few times a year. Bonus rooms lack clear purpose. These spaces exist not for daily living, but for expectation. They signal completeness, even when they remain empty. Cost without use. Every unused room still costs money. Heating, cooling, cleaning, maintenance. The financial burden of space doesn't scale with usage. A room that is rarely entered demands the same resources as one used every day. This inefficiency becomes more visible as energy prices rise and incomes stagnate. Time becomes the scarce resource. Modern Americans often have less free time, longer commutes, more fragmented schedules. Large houses don't solve this. They add responsibility. More square footage means more to manage, more to maintain, more to worry about. Space trades simplicity for obligation. Aging in oversized homes. Large houses are built for active adults. They are less forgiving as people age. Stairs multiply, distances increase, maintenance becomes harder. Many older Americans find themselves living in houses designed for a phase of life that has already passed. Downsizing becomes desirable, but not always available. The market's slow response. Despite changing needs, the housing market adapts slowly. Zoning still favors large lots, financing still rewards size, developers still build upward. Smaller homes remain rare, expensive per square foot, or socially stigmatized. The system resists recalibration. Cultural momentum. Even when individuals want less space, they face cultural pressure. A smaller house can be interpreted as a financial compromise, a temporary stage, a step backward. The symbolism of size remains powerful. Reducing space requires confidence and sometimes explanation. Younger generations question the model. Younger Americans increasingly value location over size, flexibility over permanence, experience over accumulation. But the built environment offers limited options. The housing stock reflects past priorities, not current values. This creates frustration and experimentation. The rise of alternative living. In response, new models emerge. Accessory dwelling units, townhouses, compact urban homes, co-living arrangements. These aren't rejections of comfort. They're redefinitions of it. Comfort shifts from quantity to quality. Tension without resolution. America now lives with two competing truths. Large houses are normalized. Smaller lives are becoming common. The system hasn't caught up, and until it does, house size remains a compromise between aspiration and reality. The question ahead. This tension leads to a deeper question. If large houses no longer align with how people live, why do they continue to dominate? The answer lies in what American houses represent, not just physically, but emotionally.
What big houses really mean in the American mind. By now, it's clear that American houses are large for reasons that go far beyond comfort. They are large because they mean something. And meaning, once embedded in architecture, is extremely hard to undo. Space as proof. In American culture, success is expected to be visible. The house performs that visibility. Unlike savings or education, space can be seen instantly. A larger house communicates stability, achievement, control over the future. It offers proof without explanation. The house as personal narrative. American houses often function as autobiographies. Each room reflects a chapter: growth, family, work, leisure. Even unused rooms matter because they represent possibility. They tell a story not of what life is, but of what it might become. The frontier mentality. The United States was shaped by expansion. More land, more opportunity, more room to grow. That mentality never fully disappeared. Big houses echo the frontier promise: there is always space ahead. Shrinking that space feels symbolic, like closing a door on potential. Security through scale. Large houses feel safe, not just physically, but psychologically. They buffer against uncertainty. Economic downturns, family changes, aging. Space is imagined as protection. Even when that protection is abstract, it feels reassuring. Status without confrontation. Unlike luxury cars or visible wealth, houses signal status quietly. There is no need to announce success. The structure speaks. This makes size socially acceptable, even modest. It doesn't feel like showing off. It feels normal.
Fear of contraction. Letting go of space can feel like loss, not loss of comfort, but loss of identity. Downsizing is often framed as necessity, decline, transition, rarely as aspiration. That framing makes change emotionally difficult. The social mirror effect. Neighborhoods reinforce norms. When everyone lives large, small feels conspicuous. Even those who value efficiency are influenced by surrounding scale. Architecture becomes peer pressure. Space as a substitute for time. In a culture short on time, space becomes compensation. If schedules are tight, at least the house feels expansive. If life feels compressed, the interior expands. The house absorbs stress. Emotional attachment to layout. People bond with rooms. Not just spaces, but imagined futures. A nursery that never existed, a guest room waiting for visits, a dining room for gatherings that may not happen. These rooms hold hope. Removing them feels like erasing possibility. Why change feels personal? Because houses are deeply personal, policy and planning debates feel intrusive. Calls for smaller homes are heard as cultural judgment, economic threat, moral criticism, even when they are practical. This emotional layer slows reform. Meaning outlasts logic. By this stage, the logic is clear. Large houses are inefficient for many modern lives, but meaning doesn't follow logic. It follows memory, identity, and aspiration. And that's why the American house remains large, even when life no longer requires it.
Are American houses finally getting smaller? On paper, it looks like change is coming, but in reality, the shift is uneven, slow, and full of contradictions. The statistical illusion. Recent data suggests that average new house sizes have stopped growing, and in some years, slightly declined. But averages hide detail. Many of these smaller homes are still larger than historical norms, larger than comparable housing in other countries. What changed is the pace of growth, not the baseline. Size versus location trade-off. Where houses are shrinking, they are often closer to urban centers. Buyers accept less space in exchange for shorter commutes, walkability, access to amenities. This isn't a rejection of space, it's a recalibration of value. The return of the townhouse. Townhouses and attached homes are quietly returning in many cities. They offer private ownership, reduced maintenance, more efficient land use. But they remain limited by zoning and neighborhood resistance. The desire exists. Supply lags behind. Accessory dwelling units as pressure valves. Accessory dwelling units allow smaller living spaces, multi-generational living, rental income. They don't replace large houses. They coexist with them. This reflects a compromise. Change without loss. The energy reality. Energy costs are no longer abstract. Heating and cooling large houses is increasingly expensive. Efficiency standards improve, but scale still matters. This makes size visible in monthly bills, not just ideology. Remote work changes the equation. Work from home initially increased space demand, but over time, it also highlighted inefficiency. Entire rooms exist for occasional use. The question shifts from how big should the house be to how flexible should it be. Builders experiment carefully. Some developers are testing smaller footprints, smarter layouts, shared amenities. But they move cautiously. Financing, appraisals, and resale expectations still favor conventional size. Innovation happens at the margins. Policy moves slowly. Some cities are revising zoning, allowing smaller lots, legalizing missing middle housing. But reform is uneven. Local resistance remains strong. Change requires political courage and cultural patience. A generational divide. Younger buyers are more open to compact living, mixed-use neighborhoods, reduced private space. Older buyers often retain preferences shaped by earlier eras. The housing stock reflects the past more than the future. The likely outcome. American houses are unlikely to suddenly shrink. Instead, the future looks layered. Large houses persist, smaller alternatives grow slowly, flexibility becomes the selling point. The model doesn't collapse, it diversifies. The final question, which leaves one question unanswered. If big houses are no longer inevitable, what role should they play? That's not a technical decision.
It's a cultural one, and it's still being negotiated.
What American houses are not large by accident. They are the result of history, policy, economics, culture, layered over generations. Each generation added space for reasons that once made sense. Together, those decisions created a norm that now feels natural, even inevitable. Houses as frozen values. Every house is a record of the values present at the moment it was built. American houses record faith in growth, belief in privacy, confidence in abundance. They reflect a time when land felt endless, energy felt cheap, the future felt predictable. Those conditions shaped size, the cost of carrying the past forward. Today, the conditions have changed. Families are smaller. Time is tighter. Cities are more complex. But the architecture remains. Large houses carry past assumptions into a present that no longer fully supports them. The mismatch creates friction, not crisis, but quiet inefficiency. The choice ahead is not smaller or bigger. The future of American housing is not a binary choice. It's not about shrinking for the sake of shrinking, preserving size for nostalgia. It's about alignment, aligning space with life, quality over quantity. As constraints increase, design matters more than size. A well-designed small space can support richer living than a poorly designed large one. This isn't a rejection of comfort, it's a refinement of it. Flexibility as the new luxury. The next evolution of American housing is likely to prioritize adaptable layouts, multi-use rooms, proximity over isolation. Luxury shifts from square footage to freedom of choice. What remains valuable about big houses? Large houses aren't mistakes. They provide privacy, stability, long-term adaptability. They simply aren't universal solutions anymore. Their role becomes specific, not default. Cities as the real living room. As private interiors stabilize, cities may regain importance. Parks, libraries, walkable streets, shared spaces. Public life compensates for private contraction. The balance shifts. Architecture as cultural conversation. Houses are not just structures. They are ongoing conversations between past and future, individual and community, desire and responsibility. Changing them requires listening, not just building. Closing. Thoughtful U.S. audience discussion prompt. So when we ask, why are American houses so big? We're really asking something deeper. What do we expect space to do for us? Should homes protect us from the world or connect us to it? Is success something we store inside walls or something we experience outside them? There's no single right answer. But as cities change and lives evolve, the conversation becomes unavoidable. If you were designing an American house today, from scratch, what would you prioritize? Space? Location? Flexibility? Community? Let us know how you think American housing should evolve, and why.